Good morning, and I hope I am audible. Good morning to you all, and thank you very much for the generous introduction that was given by Jafar Sadiq, my friend. And I'm really thankful to the college, the principal, the department, the HOD, the other teachers, and my friends who have invited me for this very timely and relevant contemporary kind of an international, truly international seminar at Amal College, Nilambur. I'm also truly delighted and honored to join you this morning to discuss about some of the very pertinent and serious issues in the present when our country and the whole world is going through a difficult time. As we know, the time of the pandemic. The time of the pandemic has created extreme cases of exception, states of exception all over the world, and we are facing the calamities. So, without further introductions and initiations, let us go straight into the topic of our lecture and discussion today. That is the pandemic, about the pandemic and the pandemonium that is created through this emergency of the world, and how the states across the world, the nation states across the world, how they have tackled it, how they have responded to this serious issue, and how certain emergencies are created all over the world, not just in our country, but in the Western world also. As in the case of America or Europe, we are having different states of exception. Philosophers of the world, especially French, European philosophers, and also philosophers and writers and political observers and sociologists from various parts of the world, they have responded and evaluated the situation. The leading philosophers of the world, like the post-structural philosophers of France, they have responded to it. Italian philosopher, Italy was really severely affected by the pandemic, and we have seen the massive loss of life in Italy. The Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben, he was constantly tracking the development of the pandemic in Europe and in Italy, and he has also given us an insightful observation in his various articles from the beginning of this year, from early 2020 onwards, from January onwards. He has been constantly writing about the COVID situation and the socio-political impacts of the pandemic, what kind of a pandemonium that is being created by the disease, this pestilence all across the world, especially in Europe and America. And what are the responses of the regimes all over the world, especially from Europe and America. He has tried to theorize that situation. He has tried to see a general pattern. Agamben has traced a general pattern in the kind of condition, in the kind of emergency state that is created in this global pandemic. According to Agamben, the state is becoming more and more powerful. It is not a withering away of the state, as some of the universalists have claimed earlier, but it is actually a consolidation of the state. The state power is getting consolidated because a state of emergency is created. Though it is a medical kind of emergency, there are restrictions on civil life. There are military kind of interventions in public sphere. The police kind of brutality is growing all across the world. We have seen the cases not just from Europe, but from America also, the police brutality. We have witnessed the brutal killing of George Floyd, the African American man on the streets of the United States by the police, a white police officer, almost an aged senior citizen, a 60 plus man, white man, choking him to death and brutally murdering him under the day broad under the daylight. We have seen that thing. It was. It was really received by the whole world with awe and agony and pain. We have experienced that pain as we are experiencing the pain from the Pettivudi destruction, the natural calamity that just happened in Munnar, in Rajamali. So that kind of brutalities we have seen from all across the world. So in the light of these authoritarian developments, in the light of the fascist kind of formations all across the world during the pandemic, Italian philosopher here, Giorgio Agamben, has come up with the observation that the state is becoming more and more totalitarian. The state brutality is growing. The state surveillance is on the rise. The surveillance state has exceeded into the limits of a civilized nation state, a republican state with a constitution and having a dignity for human rights and other what you call civil liberties. So all these civil liberties, all the civil rights, all the human rights are under erasure. Utilizing this emergency state or state of exception, a state of exception is created, and a new normality, a new normal is created through the surveillance and military kind of infiltrations into public sphere and human rights at large. It is happening all around the world, not just in Italy or Europe or in America, but it is happening in India also. So anyway, the observation of Agamben about the rise of the totalitarian state, about the rise of the surveillance regime, about state becoming more and more totalitarian and powerful and consolidated and entrenched with all its paramilitary and surveillance forces of control and regulation and governmentality. He develops it from Foucault onwards. So we have that from the birth of the prism. From 1970s onwards, you have that discourse on the rise of totalitarian, on the power regimes, on the panopticon vision, on what you call the gaze of the sovereign. That is developed, extended from Foucault, and very aptly, Agamben, the Italian philosopher, he has provided the world with this new insight that the powerful centers, the centered forces of power, especially the nation state, it is becoming more and more autonomous and sovereign and over-powerful and authoritarian and even totalitarian kind of regimes are created all over the world. So this postulation, observation, key stance of Agamben, I would like to pitch at this kind of an observation, because we also need to contrast it with the observations and positions of other writers and philosophers, the leading critics and philosophers of the world, like Slavoj Žižek, for example. Slavoj Žižek, early this year, he has made a prediction, very optimistic kind of prediction, that though we are stricken by the pestilence, though we are in the contagious kind of disease, it is capturing us one by one, but still there is a possibility to challenge the dominant form of the world order. The geopolitics of capitalism may be crumbled. Capitalism is under siege and attack. It is being deconstructed. This is going to be the collapse of capitalism. That was the prediction, the early political observation that was made by perhaps a slightly over enthusiastic kind of a prediction, optimistic kind of prediction, the freedom of will, the optimism of the will, if you use the term from Antonio Gramsci, as a man influenced by the Neo Left, speaking after the Neo Left and Gramscian cultural turn in critical theory and Marxist philosophy in particular. Zizek was a little bit carried away by that optimism of the will rather than the pessimism of the intellect, which perhaps you can see the positions, difference in the position in the pessimism of the intellect in Agamben and the optimism of the will that Gramsci elaborated in his prison notebooks that you may identify, we may very briefly or in a contextual way, we may identify it with the optimism in the prediction of Slavoj Žižek. Anyway, we appreciate that optimism of the will, which Gramsci has also inspired us with. But anyway, we also need to look at the pessimism of the intellect, the intellectual kind of, more critical kind of elaborations and analysis are also important in understanding the extent and the gravity of the seriousness, the severity of the situation during the global pandemic. So though Zizek has explained it as, he has foreseen the collapse of the capitalist system in the pandemic, but we also have the Agambenian kind of warning, which is more serious and which is more apt and relevant and significant, even outside Europe and America, especially in the third world, in South Asia, in places like India. The warning, the lasting philosophical and political warning of Agamben that the state is becoming more and more totalitarian, that is to be listened, that is to be understood, that is to be discussed, that is to be seriously engaged in our own context. That is my humble submission regarding that. But we also have to compare it with other responses from the reading critical minds in the world, especially from the field of gender studies and all, queer theory and gender studies and all. You have Judith Butler, for example. Judith Butler, the German intellectual and writer and the so-called inventor and leading exponent of gender studies in contemporary world. Judith Butler has made also, she has made a comment that she has written an article specifically on the COVID development, and she has argued that this pandemic is going to create a kind of equality. A kind of leveling is going to happen because we are all human beings and we are all reduced to the kind of bare life. She doesn't use that word of Agamben, the bare life and the homo sacer and the state of exception and all those things popularized by Agamben, but she argues in a similar fashion that this is going to create a kind of equality. This is going to create a kind of leveling in the world because we are all human, we are all facing the biological or medical kind of insurgency, and the pandemic has become a kind of leveler, and a kind of equality is being created through this pandemic, and there is a possibility. She views it as a kind of radical equality. A radical equality is being created by the COVID-19 virus. We don't know how much, to what extent it is possible, or it has become materialized. We can see that only in deaths we are equalized, or we are leveled. We are raised to the ground. That is true. We are not given a proper or a conventional kind of burial. We are getting some kind of burial. We are having the group burials and all those things. In that sense, as we have seen in the case of the Petimudi disaster recently, they are all buried alike. In Italy or America, we have seen the mass grave system and all. So at least in death, we are equal. That is always, it is the same. Only the funeral rituals may change, or the coffin may be a little more costlier, or you can have a burial without a coffin, you can have it with the coffin, you can have an AC kind of coffin, you can have a gilded one, but all those gilded tombs may worms unfold, says Shakespeare. So there is equality in death, that we know from Shakespeare's own times, or from the beginning of the civilization, from Renaissance period onwards. At least we have the coffins having the worms in it. So in death, we are equal. But apart from that, in our life, in our medical treatment, in access to medical and other kind of facilities, what is the kind of equality that we are receiving, especially not just in the third world like India, but in America also? What is the kind of equality that we are receiving as far as medical care and the emergency situations are concerned? It is a real issue. It's a question that is still to be explained and adequately analyzed. So anyway, though Judith Butler argues that it creates a radical equality, COVID has created a radical equality. It is only in principle, and it is only in terms of death that we are receiving that in material terms in this world. So I just briefly introduce these three positions by the leading philosophers of the world. One by Agamben about the totalitarian state in the time of the pandemic, the state creating a pandemonium, a demonic other world, a new world of disorder and chaos and statist kind of regime, statist state, a statist regime, totalitarian regime, getting more and more rooted and consolidated during the days of the pandemic, and infringing upon, curtailing, heavily coming down upon human rights and equality and notions of justice in particular. The notion of justice and truth are being distorted and manipulated for the power elite, for the ruling elite, for the advantaged group, not just in Europe and America, but it is happening in India. We will see in a short while. We will come to India and try to analyze the situations. So anyway, these three positions are could be, you may take it as yardsticks or parameters or basic launching grounds, the grounds on which we set this debate on the pandemonium that is created during the pandemic especially by the forces of authority, the state in particular, statist regimes, how they have come down heavily on the human rights issue and issues of justice, social justice in particular, in the case of India, and even in Kerala. What is the situation we need to analyze? So these, with these invocations of Agamben, Foucault through Agamben, and Zizek, the Marxist critique, Zizek and also Judith Butler, their own respective positions and observations on the pandemic and the chaotic situation, the pandemonium that is created. We may move on to perhaps the second part of my lecture, that is about the kind of chaos, about the kind of misrule, about the kind of disorder, the noisy discordance that is created, not in the positive way. I'm not talking about the polyphony. When you talk about, because of post-colonial theorists like Clement and others, they have theorized the discordance, the cacophony of post-colonialism and the new emerging literatures all across the world. I'm not talking about, in this particular lecture, I'm not talking about that kind of a positive polyphony or a noisy discordance or cacophony of diversity and difference, but here the fundamentals of justice and truth are being disordered or are deliberately made chaotic, and in that noisy discordance, something negative is happening, something anti-people is happening, something totalitarian is happening, something fascist is brewing, especially in India. And it has been brewing for the last 30 or 40 years in India, at least for from the beginning of this century, the 21st century. We know the rise of the Hindu nationalism to power, the coming of age of Indian fascism or the Hindutva wave of fascism, the mobilization of people against the constitutional ethics itself, because the Constitution guarantees a democratic state. The Constitution guarantees a secular state. The Constitution guarantees a primary relevance to justice, social, political, and economical. So social justice is the key. Social justice is the foundation of the Indian Constitution that is being tampered with. That is being done with during the days of the COVID. And even before the days of the COVID, it has been there, that kind of what you call evil propagandas and hate campaigns against social justice and those who speak for social justice. And they were otherized, they were animalized, they were demonized, and they were done with. So that is the condition in India. That is what we need to see or critically evaluate and analyze. What is the pandemonium that is created in India in the last decade or in the last couple of decades, so to say, from the beginning, at least from the beginning of the 21st century, from 2000 AD, see 2000 onwards, what happened in India? How did the nationalist forces, the cultural nationalist forces, not the nationalist forces proper, but the forces of cultural nationalism, how did they come to power? How did they manipulate the mandate of the people? And how did they usurp into power, misusing the constitutional provisions and the fundamental processes of democracy? That is an issue at stake. That is what we need to critically look at in order to correct our mistakes and in order to struggle hard and fight hard for the lost constitution, the already suspended, the already partly deconstructed and demolished state of ethics in our country, the only record of ethics and justice in the country, that is our constitution. But unfortunately, through systematic kind of propaganda, through systematic propagation of anti-justice campaigns, anti-social justice campaigns, how it was dismantled by the forces of cultural nationalism after their usurpation to power through misusing the processes of democracy, the ballot system, the voting system. All these things, we have been using it for the last 50 or 60 years of our constitutional democracy since 1950s, since Baba Saheb and others have created our constitution. It was intact for the almost intact, but I won't say perfectly intact, but it was surviving. It was not done with. The base, the fundamental, the basic ground of Indian constitution, the civil rights and the fundamental rights and the what you call the social justice paradigm, the social equality and justice paradigm, the social democracy paradigm of the Indian constitution that was created by Baba Saheb through a life of dedication and education and brilliant kind of political interventions in the drafting committee of the constitution, what he led, what he created, what he declared as modern democratic values, the fundamentals of the modern democracy, the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. All these things are under erasure, under threat, under surveillance, under strict kind of repressive kind of regimes today. So that is what we need to look into. So this began much earlier, before the COVID, from the beginning of the 21st century, and Indian education was the first target. The forces of cultural nationalism or totalitarian kind of tendencies, pro-fascist tendencies in India, they have targeted the education system first, the history books first, the textbooks of India, the school textbooks and the college textbooks and the university syllabus. They have tried to monopolize and manipulate. That is why something called saffronization was there in the air in the beginning of the 2000s when the Vajpayee regime came to power. They have initiated something called the saffronization of education, the Hinduization of the textbooks, the history erasure and additions are being appended to the history textbooks. Many things about real history was erased and deleted, and many things were put in place. And unfortunately, this was again done with the help of certain people from Kerala. Unfortunately, a Kerala scholar was paraded as lifted to Delhi as the ICHR chairman. And we know about Sudarshan Rao and others. Another ICHR chairman who was interested only in the Mahabharata, only in the epics and Puranas, and he was his life objective was to date the Mahabharata. That was the like dating the Indus Valley civilization, or what we have seen from Kiradi or from Pattanam. He was interested in that epic and the dating of the carbon dating of that particular epic, so to say. People say that, critics are saying that. So this is not just my opinion. This was articulated by the major historians of that period. In the early 2000s, it was Sumit Sarkar and Romila Thapar and others, Irfan Habib and Romila Thapar and Sumit Sarkar and plenty of other leading scholars and intellectuals and historians of India. They have created the term saffronization. It's not my coinage. But new generations may not know that because it happened some 20 years back. That is why I'm reminding you about this trajectory of the pandemonium here. So it is not beginning with the COVID. It is not a serious situation that is solely created, exclusively created by the pandemic. But my point is that it was created early in 21st century, early this century, by the forces of cultural nationalism and totalitarian monopolism, majoritarian kind of spiritual fascism in our country, if you use the term from the other scholars from the Dalit Bahujan background. Kancha Ilaiya has written elaborately about the spiritual fascism of the Sangh Parivar. Even Sumit Sarkar, a mainstream historian, he has written about, specifically, I say, a book titled The Sangh Parivar, The Fascism of the Sangh Parivar. In 2002 itself, it was published in 2000, early 2000s, in the beginning of this, at the wake of this century. So from Sumit Sarkar, we have it. From Gopal Guru, we have the critique. From Kancha Ilaiya, even foreign scholars like those who settled down here and became Indian citizens, like, for example, that woman, Gail Omveth, for example, she has written articles and books on this issue. So anyway, whether it is Gail Omveth or whether it is the other scholars, plenty of other scholars, even foreign scholars, they have written about this. Christoph Jaffrelot himself, he has written that reader about Hindu nationalism. Jyotirmaya Sharma has written about it. Amalendra Mishra has written about it. So many mainstream scholars and even international foreign scholars and our own historians and mainstream, and both Dalit Bahujan and also the so-called mainstream historians and scholars have written about it, the saffronization of Indian education. It began in early 2000 during the regime of Vajpayee and Pramod Mahajan and Murli Manohar Joshi and others. And basically, as we know, it's a post-Babari Masjid, post-Mandir Masjid kind of an issue. It began soon after the demolition of the Babari Masjid at Ayodhya in 96. It was brewing from then on. It was an anti-Mandal, anti-democratic struggle of the twice-born Asghar Ali Engineer and Gail Ahmed, they have written books on that. The twice-born riots against democracy. So it was basically an anti-constitutional, anti-democracy, because the Constitution is the book of social democracy and social justice in India. It is the Bible of democracy in India. And therefore, we need to address that issue. From it began much earlier, we know, the Hindu nationalism. We also need to trace briefly the legacy and the history, the genealogies of Hindu nationalism originating in 19th century, early 19th century, especially in Bengal, at the wake of the Bengal Renaissance, in the colonial modern, in the colonial intervention period, the wake of modernity in Bengal, that created Bengal Renaissance. But unfortunately, it was monopolized, a dominant stream from Bengal, which was a Hindu nationalist stream, which we will find in the writings of Aurobindo, Vivekananda, and Bankim Chandra. So these three doyens of the dominant form of Bengal Renaissance, which is called the Neo-Hindu kind of uprising within the Bengal. It has got various other forms. The Bhadra Log is there, the Chota Log is there, the Dalit Bahujan movements are also there. But unfortunately, the most dominant, the most consolidated, and the most centralized form of Bengal Renaissance was monopolized and dominated and carried away by the what you call the Hindu nationalist neo-Hindutva of Bankim Chandra, the Ananda Math, and the Vande Mataram kind of legacy. We know the otherizing nationalism, otherizing your own self as the other, parting your own self as the other. Self is determined as the other, marked as the other, stereotyped and reduced as the other. It's a highly gross kind of violent reductionism, reducing your own self, your own country, your own countrymen, your own brothers, your own neighbors, and your own relatives as the other. So that is, unfortunately, that is the system of inequality. That is the system of otherizing that was here in India. So it has an origin much before that, even before the Hindu nationalism of Bankim Chandra, Vivekananda, Aurobindo, Vande Mataram, and the Mlecha and Murchaya, they kind of otherizing and demonizing and slaying of the other, the genocidal kind of cultural nationalism, the fascist kind of formation, because cultural nationalism only is only another term for fascism proper. There are plenty of nationalisms that can become fascism. The majoritarian, only the majoritarian mobilization can become the fascism. And there are linguistic nationalism, there are cultural nationalisms, there are ethnic nationalisms. These can, when it becomes a majoritarian kind of a mobilization of the people, it becomes fascism proper, and it creates the genocidal kind of concentration camp. It creates the Holocaust. We have the examples in Antonio Gramsci's own Italy. He was in the prison house of Benito Mussolini. He died in that, he perished in that prison. But fortunately, his book survived, his thought survived. And that is what gives us a kind of intellectual edge against the fight against the totalitarian fascist tendencies even today. So anyway, it has an origin much beyond in history, in prehistory perhaps, and perhaps at least from the so-called Vedic age, from the beginning of the Rig Veda and the Purusha Sutta in it. It is having its beginning. So the Indian hegemony, the Indian totalitarianism, which is nothing but Brahmanism, historians and critics have called it, from Ambedkar to D.D. Kosambi. From Ambedkar, a liberal scholar, the architect of Indian Constitution, the leading jurist and socio-political scientist in the world, who received multiple research degrees from Columbia and the University of London and Germany and many other parts of the world. He called it Brahmanism. And even in late 20th century, D.D. Kosambi, a Marxist historian, D.D. Kosambi, who studied the so-called Indian traditions very critically, he also called it Brahmanism. Brahmanism is the core so-called discourse that creates the Indian hegemony or the Indian ideology. Even today, even in the contemporary world, Marxism Marxist thinkers and critics like Perry Anderson and others from the West, they call it the Indian ideology or the Indian hegemony. It is nothing but Brahmanism or the Varnashrama Dharma. In other words, in Sanskritic terms, it is Varnashrama Dharma. So it is not just having an origin. In the modern world, it is having the origin in the Bengal Renaissance, in the Bande Mataram cultural othering of Bankim Chandra, Aurobindo, and Vivekananda. In the life divine, in Gita, in Savitri, and other poetic compositions of Aurobindo, and in the poetic compositions of Vivekananda and his writings in particular, the 3 volumes, you have that rise of the Neo-Hindu, the Neo-Kayastha Hindu, the Neo-Kshatriya or the Neo-Shudra, having its origin there in the Bengal Renaissance, in the Kayastha kind of Hindu appraisal. You have its origin basically in the so-called Vedic age, something between BC 3000 and BC 1500. BC 1500 is a crucial year because that is the devastation of the Indus Valley civilization, which was a Dravidian civilization, which was a peaceful civilization, which was based on bronze and copper and all, which was not a military or war kind of invading and aggressive kind of violent civilization. But unfortunately, because of various reasons, perhaps through foreign invasion by these forces of Vedic obscurantism, or through the ecological disaster, or through the environmental changes, or through the trade collapse with its Mesopotamia was its trade partner. It was having connections with the Far East, the West Asia, and even northern part of northeastern part of Europe. So anyway, because of various reasons, economic or ecological or religious or invasive kind of reasons, it was destroyed or devastated. Perhaps the climatic change, that could also be another reason. Plenty of theories are there. Anyway, from the destruction of the Indus Valley civilization, from which India is gaining its name. India is from Indus. Indus, the river. The river has given us the name. The River Valley civilization, one of the greatest and ancient civilization that could be compared with the Egyptian or the Greco-Roman or the Mesopotamian, and all those, the Chinese and other greatest civilizations of the world. So that was collapsed and that was devastated. And from that time onwards, you have the regime of caste and varna in India. And you have the ascendancy of priestocracy in India, something called Brahmanical patriarchy, which is the key term that is developed by Indian feminists like Sharmila Rage or Uma Chakravarti or Anupama Rao today. Brahmanical patriarchy, the double labyrinth, the double-edged sword of caste and gender, which is really oppressive and which is the most inhuman, most doubly edged, most deadly and dangerous, lethal kind of power structure and hierarchy in the whole world. So the hierarchy of caste was created in the Purusha Sukta, the manly hymn, Purusha Sukta, the masculinity prayer of the mandala in Rigveda, the Adi Veda, the Rigveda. In the mandala called Purusha Sukta, you have the strange queer origin story regarding the birth of the Brahman, the birth of the Kshatriya, the birth of the Shudra and the Vaishya. That is called the Chadurvarnyam system, the Chadurvarna system, or it is otherwise called the Varnashrama Dharma system. Unfortunately, even Gandhiji couldn't get out of this system. And though he was against untouchability and caste purity and pollution, he somehow indirectly propagated its message, its basic philosophy, its basic obscurantism called Varnashrama Dharma. He wrote and published and sold that book called Varnashrama Dharma from his Navjivan Press in Gujarat. Unfortunate case, like his composition of the ideal Bhangi, while Ambedkar was writing the annihilation of caste, as we know, as Arundhati Roy and others have told us. While Ambedkar was writing the annihilation of caste in 1936, Gandhiji was writing, unfortunately, the father of the nation, he was writing, Bapuji was writing, well, Baba was writing the annihilation of caste, how to do away with this caste, this ancient calamity, this most degraded, dehumanizing thing called caste system and its religion. Unfortunately, Bapuji was writing that ideal bhangi, idealizing manual scavenging, because he believed in the so-called Swadharma, something called Swadharma and Varnashrama Dharma, and it was Kula Dharma. It is nothing but Kula Dharma or caste calling or caste duty, which was imposed from generations to generations, merely on the basis of descent and lineage. There was no scope for choice. There was no scope for selection. There was no scope for individual freedom and the will of the optimism of the will. Remember Gramsci. Unfortunately, this was the case. And even in the general, what you call the liberal kind of nationalism, this Varnashrama Dharma was there. So that is why Mahatma Phule onwards, they have, even before Gandhiji, came from that bad experience from the South African prison and the South African railway cabin. He was kicked out of that cabin because it was reserved for whites only. The white only boards were there in South Africa. It was it was an apartheid regime. It was a blind racist kind of regime till 1990s. Till the end of the 20th century. The long struggle, the long walk to freedom, Mandela and others we know. Anyway, this was the system which has its origin. India is really under this system from the so-called Vedic age onwards, after the devastation of the Indus Valley civilization, which was a Dravidian civilization, which was a peace-loving civilization. There was art and culture. We know it through its sculpture, its artifacts, its seals, its petroglyphics, or the pictorial kind of writing system, the strange system, which is also called, which is still incomplete in deciphering. Airavata Mahadevan and Asko Parpola and various other scholars, they have tried, they have somehow managed, but it is still evading a kind of comprehensive understanding. The epigraphist call it the kind of pre-Brahmi or the Indus Brahmi. Then you have Ashokan Brahmi, which was used by Ashoka, which is actually the Dharma Lipi, which was used by Ashoka to propagate the word of the Buddha, the gospel to the world, because he adopted the Dharma of the Buddha, the ethics of the Buddha as his constitution. And he inscribed it on stone in various stupas and on the pillar edicts, which is scattered all around South Asia, all around the peninsular India, and some are in China and Mongolia and Tibet and various other parts of the world. So anyway, unfortunately, after the Vedic age, or at least from the Vedic age, from the BC 2000, 1500 era, from that stage onwards, India was attacked, and India was infected, so to say. If you use the term from the pandemic, what is the pandemonium that is created by the pandemic? India was infected by this contagious contagious disease. That is the word that was used by Ambedkar to refer to this dominant discourse, the dominant religiosity in India, which is the base of the caste system or the Varna system. The origination, something that legitimizes it as religion, is Varnashrama Dharma or Brahmanical Hinduism. So this Brahmanical Hinduism or Brahmanism was called the dominant form of Hindutva, the base of Hindutva. The base of Hindutva agenda, cultural nationalism, is the values of Brahmanism, which is called the Sanatana Dharma, which is also called the Varnashrama Dharma. The Vedic Varnashrama Sanatana system, this was called the contagious disease, the contagion of India. India was stricken by this pestilence somewhere around BC 1500. Unfortunately, from there onwards, you have the infiltration of caste and varna into the society. Brahmanism, in order to maintain its own power, political power and patronage and centrality, it tried to divide the society on caste and varna lines. That is why they have improvised this Chaturvarnya system in the Purusha Sukta of Rigveda. And later it was also endorsed through the Gita by saying that I have devised, through putting it through the mouth of the Lord, that again the Sri Krishna Paramatma, the Virat Purusha, again in the Gita, he speaks that Chaturvarnyam is Maya system. It is my own device. I have devised it on Guna and Karma. Chaturvarnyam Maya system, Guna Karma Vibhagacha. So it is, I have devised, the Lord, the God, has devised it as according to the work and deeds and qualities of the human beings forever. But we have the counterpoint. We have the counterpoint in Kerala Renaissance where Narayana Guru tried to question it. He is the one who has philosophically and theoretically negated and rejected it as an absurd thing. Guru countered it by saying that guna and karma are not staying. It is not fixed. Then how can you fix the varna and caste? Guna and karma can change at any moment. Yesterday's me is different from me. A couple of years ago, you were entirely different from what is your state today. So the subjectivity and human identity can also change. Human thoughts and actions can change. So our actions and deeds and qualities may change. Change is the only reality, as articulated by the Buddha or Marx later. Change is the unchangeable. There is nothing unchangeable as change itself. So everything is subject to change. Flux, anitya, that is the philosophy of the Buddha that teaches us about the permanent reality of change. There is no permanent reality. If at all any permanent lasting reality is there, that is change alone. That is what you call the anitya. Nothing is stable. Nothing is nitya, anitya. Or anekandavada. The Jains call it anekandavada or syadvada. It's also called anatma. Anatma or anich or anitya. That is, the anich is the Pali word for that. We find it in the Pali Tipitaka, after which our own South Indian epics like the Tirukkural was written by Thiruvalluvar in the beginning of the Common Era. So the South Indian tradition is entirely different. We were more influenced by the Pali canon and the Buddhism and Jainism and Ajivaka philosophy and Christianity and Islam and Judaism and many other philosophies from all across the world, because we were open to the world. South India, Kerala, for example, it was open to the world from the beginning itself. That is why we have the Jews coming here. We have the Judapallis still surviving in Kerala today. We have the Christians coming here. We have our own people embracing Christ here. We have Islamic missionaries coming here. And we have the first mosque, the Palli, outside Arabia, that is in Kodungalur, the Cheraman Palli, the Cheraman Masjid, the Jumaat Palli, the Cheraman Palli, which is having an ancient Buddhist legacy as well before the Prophet. So at least from the time of the Prophet, it became an Islamic kind of mosque or Palli. So we have the tradition of the Palli in South India. We have the tradition, it's a Pali word. All the non-Hindu people, they use the word Palli to refer to their place of worship. The sacred place is called Palli. It's a word of Pali origin. It came to Tamil, ancient Tamil or South Indian, Dravidian or the Damila, or the Prakrit of the South. That is how Ambedkar has defined Damila or Tamila as the Prakrit, one of the Prakrits of the South. The Prakrit of Magadha is called Pali. Likewise, the Prakrit of South India, peninsular India, is termed as Damila or Tamila, from which the Dravidian, the English word Dravidian, the European word Dravidian, has also emerged. So we have a different history and culture, and our own culture and art forms are against this what you call the contagious disease, the disease against liberty, equality, and fraternity. That is the real the real problem of India, which was identified from Buddha's onward times onwards. It was the critique of caste, the critique of Varna. We remember the Buddha because he was the first major voice, the first major philosopher, and first major social interventionist to challenge and question and refute the regime of caste and Varna. He totally rejected the Varnashrama Dharma of Brahmanism, and he also denied Brahmanical patriarchy. So caste and Brahmanism was challenged by the Buddha. That is why even the foreign scholar, the English woman who came and settled here, Gail, she has written that book. She has written the intellectual biography of Ambedkar towards an intellectual enlightened India, the biography of the Neo-Buddha of India, and also she has written about Buddhism challenging Brahmanism and caste. Buddhism challenging Brahmanism and caste by Gail Omvet, the sociologist, the English woman. It is well acknowledged by both the world, the critical tradition of the world, the scholarship of the world, the contemporary world has acknowledged it, and also the Indian Enlightenment tradition in modern times, as in Ambedkar, they have saluted it. And Ambedkar's masterpiece is after the Buddha and his Dharma, the Buddha and his ethics. The Buddha and his Dharma. Dharma in Pali means ethics, the laws of ethics, the laws of justice, truth and justice that is required for the sustenance of the whole world, that is called the Dharma. And unfortunately, a kind of mixing up with the Dharma of Sanskrit and the Varnashrama Dharma has happened in it. So that is why we need to use the original Pali, Dharma, and not Dharma, because Dharma, of course, refers to the Sanskritic and the Hindu Brahmanical notion of Varnashrama Dharma too. So what is Dharma in the Hindu epics and Puranas? It is nothing but Varnashrama Dharma. And that is why Lord Ram, he killed Shambhuga in order to save this Dharma, which is nothing but Varnashrama Dharma. Because Shambhuga was termed as a so-called Shudra. He was called a Shudra, an untouchable, or the last Varnam. Though they were Savarnas included in the Chaturvarnya, the Shudras were later adopted by Brahmanism and included as the fourth Varna in order to make them lifelong slaves of Brahmanism, in order to make them their militia so that they can oppress the untouchable, the real untouchable, or the Avarna, those who are outside the caste system or the Varna system. So we need to talk about it in the light of the South Indian Dravidian movement, which was originated by Pandit Ayodhi Dasar, a great Dalit leader of organic protest from Tamilagam, from the Nilgiris and Chennai. He operated. He went to Sri Lanka and he took Diksha from the Theravada monks there, and he became a Buddhist, and he came back with the help of Colonel Olcott and John Ratnam, Reverend John Ratnam and others, Anagariga, Dhammapala and all. He has created a new Dalit movement here in South India, which is which was also a spiritual kind of a movement, which was also a kind of social religious movement, you could say. The first Neo-Buddhism in South India was inaugurated by Pandit Ayodhi Dasar, even before Ambedkar, and even before Sahodaran and Midawadi in Kerala. It was Pandit Ayodhi Dasar who initiated in the 1870s itself. When British colonialism began its census, he asked the untouchables in Tamilagam to enlist as casteless people, as casteless non-Hindus or casteless Dravidians. So Dravidian movement, Dravida Mahajana Sabha, it was founded by Pandit Ayodhi Dasar, the Dalit leader, a Pali scholar and an English scholar and a Tamil scholar, of course. His grandfather was a butler of the British. So that is why they have learned English language for 3 successive generations. And Pandit Ayodhi Dasar has become a great scholar in English, Tamil and Pali also. He learned Pali also because as Dalits of South India, they were also having the legacy of Buddhism, the Tirukural legacy, the Aimperinkappiyam legacy of Manimekhalai and Chilappatikaram and Kundalageshi and Jivaka Chindamani, Valayapati and all. So the fivefold great epics, the Aimperungappiyam of Tamil, the Agam and Puram poetry of Tamil, ancient classical Tamil that was translated by A.K. Ramanujan under the title Poems of Love and War for OUP. We can read it. So our own literary legacies, our own South Indian legacies, our own aesthetics, which is called the Tenai aesthetics of ancient Tamil, the fivefold Tenai aesthetics, Aim Tenai Vazhakkam, Aim Perungappiyam, all these are devised on the Panchashila, the fivefold precepts of the Buddha, and the Ashtanga Marga, the eightfold paths and the fivefold precepts of the Buddha. And that culture, the literary culture of South India itself is called the Sangham literature, or Changam. In Tamil, it is called a Changam. 3 Changams were there in Tamil history. So Changam or Sangam, it comes from Buddha's principles of the 3 jewels, or the 3 asylums that we have. That is Buddham, Dharmam, and Sangham. Buddham means enlightenment. Anybody can be a Buddha through education, through life struggle. So educate. That was the motto. That was the slogan that was given to youth by Ambedkar, the architect of Indian Constitution and the pioneer of Indian modernity after Phule and Guru and Ayodhidasa. Ambedkar has given us the motto: educate, agitate, and organize. Educate so that you are liberated, said the Guru in Kerala. Educate so that you are enlightened and you are liberated. And organize so that you are liberated. Educate that you are enlightened and free, and organize so that you are empowered. That is the statement of the Guru in Kerala. So he also has that Pancha Dharma principle after the Panchashila of Buddha. And that is why his own disciples, Pandit Karuppan of Kochi, Mulur, the early Avarna poet in Kerala, and Sahodar Ayyappan of Kochi, they have called him as the Kerala Buddha, Kerala Puttar, or Kerala Buddha, or Narayana Buddha, because he was articulating the wisdom of the Buddha. So it was the Buddha who challenged the caste and Brahmanism in BC 6th century. And that is why he is remembered today. And it was Ashoka 200 years after the Buddha who came and elaborated about the Buddhist principles, and he adopted the Dharma, the ethics of the Buddha, in a very cosmopolitan and secular fashion, in order to spread his what you call the governance, just governance. It was not an aggressive government. He abandoned sword. He was a Hindu. Ashoka was a Hindu, but he became great. H.G. Wells and other European scholars have termed Ashoka, the Mauryan emperor, as the great Ashoka, like the great Akbar. You have the great Ashoka because he abandoned the sword, he abandoned military, he abandoned all the violent weapons of mass destruction, and he adopted the ethical codes of the Buddha in order to maintain his province, in order to maintain his empire, the vast empire, the largest empire that was there during his lifetime, the Mauryan Empire, which we were in the margins of that empire. So the reference to Kerala, like Keraputto or Kedalaputto, it appears in the Dharma Lipi edicts of Ashoka. The edicts of Ashoka mentioned the people of Kerala as Kerala Putto or Kerala Putra in Sanskrit. It was in Pali. He wrote in Pali in the script called the Dharma Lipi, which was later termed as Brahmi, Ashokan Brahmi by the Indologists, Orientalists, Max Muller and others. So anyway, at least from the time of the Buddha, this contagion, this disease was questioned. The disease of caste and varna, the disease of untouchability and unseeability, and unimaginable barbarism. It was resisted by the philosophy of the Buddha, who included, which was a democratic order. That is the importance of the Buddha. That is why Ambedkar proclaimed that it is from my master, the Buddha, and his Sangha, that I am taking the democratic principles or the modern values of democracy, liberty, equality, and fraternity, not just from the European education, the Western education, and the French Revolution model, but from my master, the Buddha, my guru, the Buddha, and his Sangha, which was ordained or which was conjoined on the principles of democracy, inclusion, participation, representation, and freedom of speech. So these are the fundamental aspects of democracy that was liberated and recovered again in modern times at the wake of the colonial modern in India by Ambedkar, and in Kerala by Narayana Guru, and in Tamilagam by Pandit Ayodhi Dasar, and Mahatma Phule as a pioneer in the beginning of the 19th century. In 1840s itself, he gave his education. He was a Shudra, but he was denied education by saying that he is a Padaja or a Shudra, unworthy, like Shambhuga. He must be killed. If he tries to learn the art of letters, he must be killed. Even in Kerala, even a person, a bright child like Chattambi Swamigal was not given education in the Gurukula system. That is what the new educational policy, the the National Educational Policy, NEP 2020, 2016 draft, and 2020 now it is approved by the cabinet. I have been writing from 2016 onwards against it in both English and Malayalam. But unfortunately, the critical voices are not well accounted. If you raise the critique, you will be punished here. So that is what the fascist forces are doing, even through the left and right, through all the political formations. The Hindutva kind of agenda is operating, and they will punish you if you critique the system, and the hegemonic kind of tendencies that tries to dismantle the constitution and the ethics of the republic. So anyway, this is what is being the Pathashala system, the Gurukula system that is being that is what is being recommended by the new national educational policy 2020. According to that, Sanskrit must be given prominence, and the mother tongue, it is paraded as given a kind of slight dominant status, but behind the curtain or behind the mask, it is Sanskrit. If you read closely, if you read it critically, the new document, which is there in the new Education Ministry website. Earlier it was called the MHRD website. Still it is having that kind of a URL, mhrd.gov or something. But anyway, if you check that document from the Ministry of Education, Government of India, you will see that in the guise of mother tongue encouragement, outwardly you see that it's a kind of what you call it's like the Avarna Shanti that was there in Kerala. The Avarna Shantis were appointed, but none could join duty because there was caste Hindu kind of resistance against it. And most of them, they abandoned the job, or they committed, some of them, a person from the community of Ayya Vaikuntha, who began this Kerala Renaissance from South Nanjinad, establishing in 1836, he established the Samatva Samajam in Nanjinad, and he organized all the untouchables, and he fought against untouchability. He touched that rope in that Sujindram temple for that Swadi Thirunal, the Sagala Kala Vallabhan, the jack of all trade and arts. He imprisoned him, and he put it into that Singaritop prison. And he was tortured, like the birth of the prison of Foucault. He was tortured, he was humiliated, he was killed inch by inch, but fortunately he survived. Taikadaya intervened, and somehow he was influential with the British residents, because the Britishers were the residents and the ruling elites there. Somehow he managed to acquit him. But 140 days of torture, that has nearly killed him. He couldn't do much after his release from Shingarithopu. He was tortured in the tiger panther den of Swadhitirunala, and also in that chili chamber, a chamber full of dried chili, where he was hanged topsy-turvy and he was mutilated. So anyway, from the days of Ayya Vaikuntha, you have that struggle. And you have that resistance against this Varnashrama Dharma, this Chaturvarnya religion, the regime of caste in Kerala, at least. And we have in Guru, you have the articulation, caste as humanity. The caste of humanity is itself, or humanness. If animalness, if cowness is the caste of the cow, animalness is if animalness is the caste of the cow, or cowness is the caste of the cow, humanness or humanity at large could be the caste of the human being. That was the proclamation of the Guru. And he also wrote Jadi Dharmayam and Jadi Lakshanam by declaring that it is a species, Punarna Perunnadellam Urinam, that can procreate and that can embrace and procreate. It is the same species. He scientifically proved it. And his own disciples like Sahodaran and others, they have written elaborately about it. But unfortunately, the covert forces of casteism, the caste Hindu kind of elitism, it continued in disguise. It was created and recreated through the discourses of art and literature and culture. In the guise of the epics and Puranas, they have reoriented and re-established the casteist regime in Kerala. And through the Ramayana and Mahabharata recitals, which was actually we were warned against this kind of Mahabharata Pattatanam by Professor Ilangulam Kunjampiள்ளai himself in the 1950s, soon after the Renaissance. It was Professor Ilangulam Kunjampiள்ளai, professor of Malayalam, becoming an expert of Kerala history, a doyen and a pioneer of modern Kerala history. Ilangulam, he has warned in his writings against this Mahabharata Pattatanam or Mahabharata recitals, which was done by the scholars and pandits in order to Hinduize the people, the poor people, the Dalit Bahujans, the common people, the masses. They are carried away by the so-called literary and the cultural nuances and the recitals and the music and the ornamental bombastic language that is used and all those things. And they think it as something canonical. They think something as dogmatic, something which cannot be questioned, and they accept it without questioning. So the common people who take it for granted, they are beguiled. It's a mass deceit. It's a cheating of the people through which this Mahabharata and Ramayana recitals are operating. Along with it, Gita, Giri Shibirams were also organized with the money of the taxpayers, with taxpayers' money, with the precious money that the working people like you and me are giving to the state. That money was used for the propagation of this through the official media. Even today, you have the bombastic Ramayana recitals from the early morning itself. You cannot switch on the radio. You cannot watch the media. Both the official media of the state and also even the private media, they are indulging in this kind of a continuous propaganda about Ramayana and Mahabharata. And what are these things? It was totally rejected by, these are the documents of otherization. These are the documents of animalization. These are the documents of genocide, genociding the other, animalizing and slaying the other. That is what is happening. Demonizing the other, demonizing your political opponent or religious opponent and trying to annihilate them, creating a discourse or slur against them and annihilating them. So that is what you see in the Ramayana. You find these monkeys and demons. What was done to Shurpanakha, what was done to Hidimbi, what was done to Tadaka, what was done to those Dalit Bahujans like Sugriva and Bali, how Bali was sniped, how that Kumbhakarna was killed, how Ravan was killed, how Mahishasura was killed. So Mahishasura or Ravan or Mahabali, all of them were South Indian kings. All of them resisted the Varnashrama Dharma project of Brahmanism. For that, they were demonized and they were slayed. They were killed eventually. And that too, not directly, not in an open battle or not even in a war. like when Tipu Sultan was killed in an open war with the British, defending his capital Srirangapatnam in 1799. So not even through that kind of a war or a series of Carnatic wars, but through cheat and covet, through third-rate cheat, like Shambhuga, we have discussed Shambhuga. Shambhuga was mentioned by Sahodaran when Madan Mohan Malavya came to Kerala in 1920s, and he tried to raise that slogan, Jai Shri Ram, here in Tirunakara Maidan in Kerala, in Kottayam. It was outrightly rejected by Sahodaran Ayyappan and his brothers by saying that Ram who killed Shambhuga is not going to be our Lord. He's the least human. He's not even a human being. Then how can he become the killer? How can the bloody murderer of Shambhuga become the lord of the Keralite? It can never happen. The reign of Mahabali or Ravan could be better. We know about Chandrasekhar Azad, the Ravan. So Sahodaran articulated in Jai Ravan, he said, Jai Ravan Azad Ravan. Sahodaran said in 1920, and Guru, because he was able to state this for Kerala Renaissance and modernity, Sahodaran was able to reject the name of Ram outrightly before the Madan Mohan Malavya agenda of Hindu Mahamandalam. Because he was the disciple of Narayana Guru, he proclaimed that it is the British who gave him sannyasam. Because if it was in the time of Rama, I would have met with the fate, that cruel fate of Shambhu. Okay, I think time constraint is there. Is there time constraint? Do we have to wind up the talk now? Okay. How much time we have? How much more time we have?
Sir,
how much time we have?
Time for, sir, we may wind up now and we may move on to the question answer session, the interactive session.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. That, okay. Right.
You may conclude, sir.
Okay, just a few more minutes. Let me conclude. So Ram was rejected by Kerala Renaissance. It was the Guru who proclaimed that Ram Raj is not acceptable to us, because in Ram Raj, we will meet with the fate of Shambhuga. So it is not acceptable. And also, in Jivakarunya Panchakam, he proclaimed that the killer has no virtue. He may be a great lord and a great Maryada Purushottam, but he's a killer. He has killed Shambhuga to Ravan, to all those Dalit Bahujans of South India and neighboring states like Sri Lanka. So the killer cannot be the king. The killer cannot be the god. The killer cannot be even a human being. Kulunnavanilla Sharanyada. Matella Gunangalu Arnidilum. Kollaigil Avan Gunamulla Puman, Alaigil Murgatinu Tudyanaman. So that was the sutra of Madan Mohan Malavya. So now, unfortunately, the people who are educated in this liberal system, but because of their caste Hindu background and affiliation, they are bringing back Ram as the truth principle of Gandhi, or as the whatever different Rams are being created. They talk about different Mapala Ramayanams and Adivasi Ramayanams and other Mahabharatams and so on and so forth. Whatever it is, these are the texts of otherizing. These are the legal texts of genocide. These are otherizing texts. These are demonizing texts. These are animalizing texts. These are texts and documents of genocide in the country. It has been proven and it has been rejected by Kerala Renaissance in early 20th century itself. So this is the unfortunate situation here. So in the cover of the pandemic, in the cover of the COVID crisis, a state of exception is being created, and one by one, in the cover of the night, we are facing this kind of new things or upheavals or subversions, and real subversion of democracy and the constitution is happening, and that must be resisted and rejected by the people. And young people in particular, only young students and researchers can do something about it. And I'm very eager to listen to the articulations and responses of the young students and researchers and teachers from all across India. They have joined, and outside they are here. So thank you very much for this opportunity and the patient listening. And I'm eager to learn from you and listen to your perspectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It was a highly insightful and informative talk. You have started your talk by mentioning the philosophers of the time, how they responded to this pandemic. Then, am I audible, Shanavas?
Yeah, audible.
And you moved on to the Indian condition, how India has already been afflicted with the pandemic of caste and varna system. Then you came to the context of South India, how historically we built a system. You elaborated on that, how historically we built a system to challenge the affliction of caste and varna system. It was a highly structured, thought-provoking, illuminating lecture talk on the topic. So thank you very much for giving us such a wonderful talk. Sir, shall we move on to the Q&A session, question answer session, sir?
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Our participants have posed questions here, but sir, Dalits in India are actually, you have mentioned that in your talk, they are already an afflicted people. They are afflicted by the pestilence of, we use that particular term used by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. They are afflicted by the contagion or pestilence of this caste varna system here. Sir, I would like to put this question to you. Sir, in what ways this present pandemic, COVID-19, has it made them more vulnerable? The Dalits in India, they are already a people afflicted by this pestilence of caste varna system. Has this COVID-19 made them more vulnerable, or in what are the ways it has affected them? Sir, please.
Yes, indeed, as we know from all the disasters, whether it is medical emergency or the natural calamity, it is the people at the bottom who are suffering the most, as we have seen from the Rajamalai. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So whether it is the natural calamity or the medical pestilence like this, it is the people at the bottom who are severely affected. Again, we need to create an awareness of this reality that we are going to be the losers. The majority of the people in India, the taxpayers on whose toil the nation survives, or the world is surviving, the producers of primary food and agriculture and industry and other labor and construction, and in every part and every walks of life, they are the basic producers or the fundamental working force of the world and this nation. So we are being affected. The people are being affected, especially the Dalits and the Adivasis. Look at the crisis in the tribal areas. So the Adivasis, the outcasts, the minorities, women, and working forces, Dalit Bahujans, and not the power elite, they can easily get out of the pandemic. They have all the medical facilities. They have all those provisions of the state. They are monopolizing it also. So we need to come together and we need to resist as a whole. Then we can end this kind of a pandemonic kind of a regime. So that we must make it into a political point, like the optimism of the will that I mentioned from Gramsci to Zizek. It is still surviving in Zizek. So that optimistic kind of a collectivity we need to show, and we need to come together. Nobody can resist this contagious disease, this pestilence alone. So we can come together and we need to develop further fraternities and camaraderies and further broader alliance against the pestilence of India, the internal imperialism of India, the divide and rule policy of Chaturvarnya, the Varnashrama Dharma can also be resisted as a whole. The people as a whole, when they resist, majority of people when they come together, the Dalits, the Adivasis, the minorities, women, and other radical groups and progressive groups, the democratic groups, when they come together, we can very effectively resist and challenge and make a survival. That is my optimism of the will. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. One participant, Mr. Nivedita Kumar, she comments on it. Shall I read this comment posted by that participant, sir?
Yes, please.
Brahmins alone wrote the magnificent literature about all aspects of life, earth, or even the universe. Hindus mostly are very liberal in their outlook, attitudes, and actions. So as per my understanding from your discourse, the majority of the nation is pandemonium causing and democratic. Would you like to comment on it, sir? This is by Nivedita. Yeah.
Okay. So it is true that there are greater literary and so-called aesthetic works, but aesthetics alone cannot run the world. Aesthetic alone cannot sustain life and the liberation of all in this world. So we also need democracy. We are a democracy. We are not an aesthetic kind of theocracy. We are not a meritocracy. We are a democracy and we have a constitution. So the constitution is the fundamental book of survival. The constitution is the most beautiful work. That is the insight that we have from Kerala Renaissance. In Kerala Renaissance, Narayana Guru declared justice as the most aesthetic thing, the most what you call solemn beauty. When you remember, when you ponder, it is justice itself. Orkundorum, Naranya Saundaryam, the fulfilling beauty, aesthetics is justice. There is no truth and no peace, no life without justice. If you are denied justice, there won't be peace. There will be struggle. There will be protest. There will be pandemonium will be there. So you cannot have a peaceful life without justice and truth and an adherence to justice and the ethical code or the principles of ethics that are enshrined in the Constitution. So therefore, we need to think beyond aesthetics and beauty, mere beauty, and we need to think of the well-being of all the beings on earth. So that is where ethics is more appropriate than mere beauty. Mere beauty can deceive you, and you can smile and be a villain. The patrons of art, look at Hitler, or the man in Robert Browning poetry. He can kill his wives, but he is a patron of arts. So that is what Brahmanism is all about. It can appreciate and create the so-called art and classical art, but at the same time, it's all done at the expense of the people at the bottom. Those who create the drums, they cannot carry and play it. But when the drum is created from cowhide, it is created from cowhide, but that can be taken into the temple. But the so-called creator of that drum or the percussion instrument using the leather instrument, he cannot go there. That is what Guru also asked. If the leather chappal, it is on your feet, you cannot take it into the temple. But if it is the leather hide is on the drum, it is taken to the sopana, to the sanctum sanctorum. What is this absurdity? അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് സായിപ്പിന്റെ ഭരണം കൊണ്ട് ഒരുപാട് ഗുണങ്ങളുണ്ട് എന്ന് ഗുരു പറയുന്നതിന്റെ ഒരു കാരണം ഇത് തന്നെയാണ്. കന്നിൻ തോല് കാലിൽ ചേർന്നാൽ അതിന് വിരോധവും, അതേസമയം ചെണ്ടയിലാണെങ്കിൽ അത് അകത്തേക്ക് കൊണ്ടുപോവുകയും ചെയ്യാം. So what is this absurdity? What is this ridiculousness? What is this double speak? So that is the take on the aesthetics and ethics debate as far as I am concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. One George Matthew asked this question. Why did we also have illiterate people who could be manipulated by corrupt missionaries in spite of the magnificent Brahmins and the literature? maybe the Varnashrama Dharma didn't bother to be inclusive enough to the masses. He's focusing on that. Varnashrama Dharma was not that much inclusive enough to be inclusive enough to the masses, and this is what he is asking.
Okay, that is a good observation. Thank you for that. That is the reality. It is an exclusionary system. It's an elitist system. It is called the stratified surveillance system or graded inequality by Ambedkar. So it is never inclusive. It excludes the vast majority of people as untouchables. That is the anti-democratic part of it. It expels the Avarna, the Dalit Bahujan, and people of the other religions also as others. And inferior status is provided to women of all Varnas and castes. They are all equal to Shudra, and Shudras are supposed to be inhuman kind of slaves, lifelong slaves to the other Trivarnika. So it is an unequal system. It is a graded inequality. It casts away the majority of people, and it is never inclusive and democratic. That is why it must be totally rejected, and its literature should also be rejected.
Sir, Dr. Twincy Varghese asked, could you please elaborate the word Palli? You have mentioned the etymological details of the word Palli, and could you elaborate that?
Yes, thank you. I have written elaborately in Malayalam. It is there in my new book. Chapter is there in my new book, Puttan Keralam, Kerala Samskarathinte Bauddha Adittara. So that word is a reminiscence of Buddhism and Jainism in South India. Only in South India, we have that word. In Odisha, it is there. In Andhra, it is there. In Karnataka and Tamilagam and Kerala. In these 5-6 states, that word is there as a common affix to place names all over South India, South Peninsula and the eastern part of India up to Bhubaneswar. Nayapalli is a place in Bhubaneswar. Nampalli is a place in Hyderabad in Andhra region. Tiruchirappalli is in Tamil Nadu. Karthikapalli, Karunagapalli, Pudupalli, all these regions are here in Kerala. Even I am sitting in a place called Talayattam by the Periyar, the longest river in Kerala now. So it is the most common affix that you find in toponymy, in place names all over South India, not just in Kerala. So this came to South India through the Pali Tamil collection. As I told you, it is not found in Sanskrit or any other languages. Only in Tamil, ancient Tamil and South Indian parlance of Pali, the Dakkini Pali, the southern Pali, you have the term Palli. So it refers to, originally it refers to a vihara or a place of meditation or worship by the Buddhists, and also Jains also use it. They commonly use now the Basti. Jain Basti is the common word, but in South India, some place names are associated with Palli as well. And this was used by the Christians when they began their journey in South India after the apostle, it is believed from CE 1st century onwards. It was used by the Christians, and it was used even before the Christians. It was used by the Jews because the Judapalli is the name that was given to the synagogue. All over the world, it is known, the Jewish worshipping place is known as synagogue. But here in South India, it is known as the Judapalli. We have the Judapalli in Chandamangalam, we have the Judapalli in Mala, we have the Judapalli in Mattancheri. Within Mattancheri, you have the black Jews and the white Jews, different Paradeshi Palli undu, Karta Judapalli undu. Plenty of, from the Jews onwards, it was used. So it shows the long legacy of Buddhism. Buddhism was here in South India, at least from the time of Ashoka in BC 3rd century. In BC 3rd century, the missionaries of Ashoka, the nuns and monks, they have reached here. They have introduced the Brahmi script or the Dharma Lipi in South India, which has become the mother of all scripts in South Asia as a whole. So the long exposure to Buddhism, the Pali Canon, and also the Dharma Lipi or Brahmi script, these things have created this word, not just Pali, Cheri is also that. Cheri or Seri means the monastery. It was originally the monastic complexes of Buddhism. So Cheri, later when the Buddhists were forced to become untouchables by Brahmanism, and Brahmanism took over by the 8th century onwards, it has casted away the Buddhists who never submitted to Brahmanism as the untouchables. That is how the abode of the Buddhists became the Cheri. Now the Avarna settlements are called Cheri, the Pule Cheri or the Pare Cheri, and so on and so forth, because they were originally Buddhists. And Brahmanism casted them away. Untouchability was a punishment. It is explained in who are the untouchables, how they became so by Ambedkar. And also in Kerala, this is explained in Dr. K. Sugadan's book called Buddha Madhum Jati Vyavasthim, how the caste system was enforced by Brahmanism in Kerala after the 8th century by casting away the former Buddhists who never submitted to Brahmanism. So all the toponymical evidences and cultural evidences are there to see this long-lasting legacy of the Pali, which is used by the Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, and Jains and Buddhists in South India altogether. So it is an anti-Brahmanical, counter-hegemonic legacy that the word entails. Pali, the most sacred space which cannot be, the space of ethics and justice. And justice is the only thing which cannot be deconstructed. Thank you.